on. Say the word amen quietly to yourself. Right now. Say it. Let it leave your lips. Let it sit in the air for a moment. You have said that word, or heard it said, more times than you can count. In churches, at funerals, at the end of prayers spoken over you before you could understand what prayer was. If you grew up anywhere near Western Christianity, that word has been part of the sonic fabric of your life for as long as you can remember. Billions of people say it every single week in every language on every continent where a Christian congregation gathers, and nobody ever explained where it came from. Not your Sunday school teacher, not your vicar, your priest, your pastor. The word is simply there, has always been there. A piece of liturgical furniture so familiar that asking about its origin feels almost impolite. It is there. It has always been there. Why would you ask? Spinoza asked. He spent years on this specific question, on what the Hebrew liturgical vocabulary owes to the Egypt that Moses inhabited for the first 40 years of his life. What Spinoza found has been sitting in the sources ever since, waiting for someone to read them carefully enough to see it. I'm going to show you exactly what he found, but I need to tell you first about a woman I have known since I was a boy, and what happened one afternoon when I made the mistake of telling her about this. Before I get to her, the name of the Egyptian god. I will get there in a moment. But first you need to understand what kind of god this was, because that changes everything about what happens when the two words sit next to each other. There are standard explanations for the word Amen. The church offers them freely enough if you ask. The word derives from the Hebrew root Amen, Aleph, Mem, Nun, meaning firm, reliable, true. It was used in the Hebrew scriptures as a response to declarations of fact or to oaths. A congregational confirmation meaning so be it, or truly, or it is so. It appears in the Hebrew Bible across the Psalms, in Deuteronomy, in Nehemiah. By the time of the early Christian communities, it had passed into Greek liturgical practice unchanged, one of the very few Hebrew words to survive the translation of the scriptures into Greek, preserved in its original form because no Greek equivalent captured its weight. From Greek into Latin, from Latin into every European language that Christianity touched. The etymology is documented. The transmission path is clear. The standard explanation sounds convincing. I believed it for years. Then I found something in a library that made me put down my tea and sit very still. It was the early 1990s, and I was working in a reading room. I will not say which one precisely, because the important thing is not the geography, but what I found there. The room had high windows, cold autumn light coming in at a flat angle, long wooden tables with the particular smell of libraries that have housed the same books for decades. I'd been working for several weeks with translations of Egyptian hymn texts, specifically the corpus of material associated with the deity whose central sanctuary was at Thebes and who had been, for approximately 1,000 years before Moses was born, the preeminent god of the Egyptian state religion. The deity was Ammon. I was working from a translation. The scholar E.A. Wallace Budge had produced a rendering of the great hymns to Ammon in the 1890s from the Papyrus of Leiden, dated approximately 1,350 years before the Common Era. The papyri had come from Thebes. They preserved the liturgical texts of the temple cult, including the ritual forms through which the congregation participated in worship. I was reading for a different purpose entirely, tracing a specific motif in how ancient liturgical communities related to an unseen deity, when I came to a passage that stopped me. The passage described the structure of a temple ceremony. The priest addresses the congregation. The priest makes a series of declarations about the nature and power of the god. And at the close of each declaration, in the structure that any Anglican or Catholic or Baptist churchgoer would recognize immediately, because it is still the structure of every congregational prayer they have ever sat through. The congregation responds with a word that confirms the priest's declaration, a word that affirms the truth of what has just been said, a word that serves in the liturgy of the temple of Amon-Ra at Thebes around 1,350 years before the Common Era, exactly the function that Amen serves in every Christian church on earth today. The tea went cold before I noticed it had cooled. Now, Amen. The name. Let me tell you what kind of god this was, because it matters enormously. Amon appears in Egyptian religious texts from approximately 2,000 years before the Common Era. He is a god of the city of Thebes in Upper Egypt, and he rises to prominence as Thebes rises to political dominance over the rest of Egypt. By the 16th century before the Common Era, the period that Egyptologists call the New Kingdom, the period of Egypt's greatest imperial expansion, Amon has merged with Ra, the sun god, to become Amon-Ra, and has effectively become the state deity of the most powerful civilization on earth. His name in Egyptian means the hidden one. This is not a minor detail. It is the theological core of the deity's identity. Amon is the god who cannot be seen, who is present everywhere but has no visible form, who underlies all creation but does not reveal himself. He is the wind that moves unseen. He is the animating force beneath all visible things. The Leiden Papyrus addresses him directly. Thou art hidden, O Amon, and no man knoweth thy form. The theological concept embedded in the name is precisely the theology of a God who must be addressed, confirmed, and affirmed, because he cannot be observed. The liturgical function of the congregation's response, the calling of the name, the affirmation of the deity's presence, the spoken confirmation that he is real and present even though he cannot be seen, emerges directly from this core theological characteristic. You say the name because you cannot see the God. You say it to confirm what cannot be confirmed any other way. Here is the observation that Spinoza made, and I want to be careful about how I frame it, because the standard etymological counter-argument is real and deserves to be addressed honestly. The word Amen in Hebrew begins with Aleph. The name Amon in Egyptian begins in the original with a different consonant, a yod, in the transliteration that most scholars use. The academic consensus is that this phonological difference prevents a direct etymological connection. The two words are different words. The Aleph and the Yod are not the same consonant. The standard argument says the Hebrew Amen and the Egyptian Amon are consonantally distinct at the first letter, and therefore the similarity is coincidental. Spinoza called this the question the Church had answered too quickly, not because the phonological argument is wrong. It is a real argument, and I am not dismissing it, but because the standard etymology settles a question of word origin while leaving entirely open a different and more uncomfortable question, not whether the word amen derives linguistically from the word Amon, but whether the liturgical function of the Hebrew congregational response, its theological purpose, its ritual position, its role as affirmation of an unseen divine presence, was shaped by the Egyptian religious world in which Moses had spent 40 years. These are different questions. The first is a question of linguistics. The second is a question of cultural transmission. Spinoza understood this distinction precisely, and it is the distinction the Church has been most careful not to make. What I'm not saying is that the word amen is the word Amon. I'm saying something more uncomfortable than that. I'm saying Spinoza asked the question, and the Church never answered it. What I'm about to tell you about Moses cannot be unlearned, not because it is disturbing, though it is that eventually, but because once you see the structural argument, you see it everywhere, in every piece of liturgical practice that the Hebrew tradition shares with its Egyptian predecessor. There is a verse in the New Testament, in the Acts of the Apostles, chapter 7, verse 22. It was written by Luke, and it concerns the life of Moses before the Exodus. The verse reads, Moses was educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, and he was powerful in speech and action. Educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, not some of it, all of it. Think about what that means practically. Moses spent the first 40 years of his life as an Egyptian prince, not as a slave, not as an outsider, but as a member of Pharaoh's household, educated in the full curriculum of the most sophisticated civilization on earth. Egyptian religion, Egyptian philosophy, Egyptian ritual practice, the theology of the temples at Thebes, the center of the Amon cult, with its liturgical system in which the congregation affirmed the presence of the hidden God. Sigmund Freud, in his 1939 book, Moses and Monotheism, argued that Moses was an Egyptian priest of the Aten cult, the short-lived monotheism of Akhenaten, violently suppressed after his death. Freud's specific thesis was contested vigorously by archaeologists, William Foxwell Albright described it as totally devoid of serious historical method. The evidence for an ethnically Egyptian Moses is not strong, and I acknowledge that. But Freud had opened a door serious scholars have not closed. You cannot reject Acts 7, verse 22. You cannot reject the tradition's own account of 40 years of Egyptian formation. And the question Freud could not answer remains. If Moses absorbed 40 years of Egyptian religious and ceremonial practice, what precisely did he absorb? What ritual patterns did he carry when he began constructing the religious system that would become Judaism? It was this question, this specific question about the cultural content of Moses's Egyptian formation, that I made the mistake of raising one autumn afternoon over tea with a woman I had known since childhood. Mrs. Dorothy had been a contralto in the choir of St. Peter Mancroft, the great medieval church in the center of Norwich, for nearly 40 years. I had known her since I was a boy. She had been part of the fabric of the church community I grew up in, a small, composed woman with precise diction and a quality of attentiveness that made you feel she was genuinely listening rather than waiting for her turn to speak. I visited her occasionally, perhaps twice a year, for tea in her apartment on a quiet street in the city. The apartment had heavy curtains of burgundy velvet, cushions embroidered with passages from the Psalms, a framed photograph of Norwich Cathedral on the mantelpiece, the particular smell of old paper and good furniture, and slightly too much radiator heat. I had been working on the material about Moses and Egyptian liturgy for some months. I was in the early stages of what would become years of investigation. And on an afternoon in early autumn, the light already going orange through the burgundy curtains, tea cooling in good cups, I mentioned as something interesting I had recently found that the congregational response structure in the Hebrew liturgy appeared to mirror, with some precision, the congregational response structure in the temple hymns of Amon-Ra. Mrs. Dorothy put down her cup. There was a silence that had a texture to it. Not hostility, not confusion. Something more absolute than either. She said, "I think you should go now." I said something. I do not remember precisely what, something inadequate. I gathered my coat. She walked me to the door with the particular courtesy that is more final than coldness. The door closed. I stood on the pavement outside for a moment, hearing nothing. The street was very quiet in the way that streets are quiet in early autumn evenings, a particular quality of stillness. I walked home. We did not speak again. What I felt was not anger, not at her and not at the situation. What I felt was the specific loneliness of knowing that certain conversations close certain doors, and the door does not open again, and there is nothing to be done about that. Some knowledge has a social cost that cannot be recovered. Mrs. Dorothy had been part of my world since childhood. She was not part of it after that afternoon. I have thought about her often in the years since. I think she was afraid of something that I, in my enthusiasm for the documentary evidence, had not adequately considered. That some truths, even when they are true, cost people more than the person telling them understands. And that is when Akhenaten did something that no pharaoh had ever done. He did not simply promote a different god, he erased the other god's name. But before I show you what happened after he died, and what happened after he died is the piece that Spinoza found most significant, let me tell you who Akhenaten was. Akhenaten was the pharaoh who ruled Egypt between approximately 1353 and 1336 years before the Common Era. He is known to history primarily for a religious revolution that was, by any measure, extraordinary. He closed the temples of the traditional Egyptian deities, suppressed the priestly cult of Amon-Ra, and imposed a form of monotheism centered on the worship of the Aten, the solar disk. He moved the capital from Thebes, the city of Amon, to a new city he built from nothing called Akhenaten, now known as Amarna. And he did something that no ruler in the ancient world had done before him. He ordered the name of Amon erased from every monument in Egypt, from temple inscriptions, from statuary, from the cartouches of pharaohs who had ruled before him. Stonemasons were sent throughout the country to chisel the name out of the stone wherever it appeared. The gods of the traditional Egyptian pantheon could remain, but Amon, the hidden one, whose name and whose theology sat at the center of Egyptian state religion, was to be removed from the record entirely. The suppression was total. the name was gone from stone. The temples were closed. The priests were dispersed. Akhenaten died in approximately 1336. He was succeeded, after a brief and turbulent period, by a boy king whose original name was Tutankhaten, servant of the Aten, and who changed his name in the first years of his reign to Tutankhamun, servant of Amon. The restoration had begun within a decade of Akhenaten's death. The priests of Amon returned to Thebes. The temples were reopened. The name of Amon was recut into the stones from which it had been erased. And in the reaction against Akhenaten that followed, a reaction so thorough that his own name was erased from the records that he was referred to in later documents only as the criminal of Amarna, the cult of Amon-Ra was restored to a position of authority it would maintain for generations. Now here is the paradox that Spinoza identified, and that I want you to hold carefully, because it is the most difficult piece of this argument to dismiss. The word Amen as a formalized congregational liturgical response appears most prominently in Deuteronomy chapter 27. 12 declarations of curse, each one read by the Levites, each one confirmed by the entire assembled people with the single word Amen. The first and most structured use of the congregational form in the entire Hebrew scriptural tradition. The book of Deuteronomy, in scholarly consensus, takes its present form no earlier than the 7th century before the Common Era, the period of the Josianic reforms, the consolidation of Aaronide priestly authority, the maximum formalization of Hebrew liturgical practice. Now count the centuries. Akhenaten suppresses the cult of Amon in approximately 1335. Within a generation, the cult is restored with greater authority than before, because persecution creates institutional memory. The priests who had seen the name erased from stone understood, with a precision their predecessors lacked, why the name must be preserved. Amon, the hidden god, the god whose nature is precisely that he cannot be fixed in any visible form. You cannot chisel out a God who has no image. The Hebrew formalization of Amen as congregational response occurs in the period following the maximum disruption of the Near Eastern world, the period in which Egyptian religious memory was most widely distributed through diaspora, exile, and cultural contact. The formation of Hebrew liturgy precisely in the cultural space Akhenaten had emptied and refilled. So there is your connection. A word, a god, a period of history. Settled? Not quite. Because Spinoza found 3 things that the etymology argument does not touch. 3 structural points. And the third is the one you will find hardest to dismiss. 3 things Spinoza identified in the architecture of Hebrew liturgy that mirror with more than coincidental precision the architecture of Egyptian temple practice, specifically the temple practice associated with Amon-Ra. The third is the most difficult to ignore. I will build to it. The first is the structure of congregational confirmation. In the Deuteronomy 27 ceremony, the 12 curses the people assembled, each curse proclaimed by the Levites, each curse confirmed by the people with Amen, the structural logic is precise. A priestly declaration, an assembled people, a congregational response that affirms the reality of something unseen. The authority of the declaration depends on the response. Without the Amen, the curse is simply words. With it, the congregation makes it real. In the Leiden papyrus hymns, dating approximately 7 centuries before Deuteronomy reached its present form, the identical structure. A priest addresses Amon, makes declarations about the nature and power of the hidden god, and the congregation responds with an affirmation of the deity's presence. The God who cannot be seen must be confirmed by speech. The function is not supplementary. It is the mechanism by which an invisible deity is made present in a specific ritual moment. Both traditions use the same structural logic. In both, the congregation's verbal affirmation performs the theological function of making the unseen real. The second structural point, the theology of hiddenness. The specific theological concept embedded in the name Amon, the hidden god, the deity who is everywhere present but nowhere visible, who animates all things but cannot be depicted, is not a peripheral characteristic. It is what Amon is. The Leiden hymns address this directly. Amon is hidden from the gods, His color is unknown. His image has not been displayed in the sanctuary. No shrine encircles him. The God of the Hebrew tradition, as Spinoza was the first to examine systematically in the Tractatus, is characterized with striking consistency by the same theological attribute, the prohibition of images, the invisibility, the hiddenness that must be affirmed rather than seen. The second commandment, the prohibition on graven images, is not merely a rule. It is a theological statement about the nature of the deity. The God of Israel is like Amon in this precise theological respect: present, real, powerful, and specifically not visible. Spinoza's analysis in the Tractatus was not that the Hebrew God is Amon. His argument was more careful than that Moses, educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, shaped his formulation of the Hebrew deity's attributes in the context of the theological world he had spent 40 years inhabiting. The hiddenness of God is not simply revealed wisdom. It is also a formulation that would have been available to a man who spent 4 decades in the culture of the hidden God. The third structural point, the one I said you would find hardest to dismiss, is this. In both traditions, the congregational response serves the same psychological and social function. It is not about the deity. It is about the community. The moment when a gathered people speaks with one voice, when all the individual hesitations and private doubts are subsumed into a single affirmation, is the moment when the community becomes a community. Amen. At the end of a prayer is not information. It is not a theological statement. It is the sound a group of people makes to confirm, to each other and to themselves, that they are together in this, that the thing being said is shared, that the individual is not alone with their faith. The Temple of Amon needed that sound. The Hebrew liturgy needed it. Every congregation that has ever gathered needs it. Spinoza, in the Tractatus, identified this as the core mechanism by which Moses constructed Hebrew collective identity, not by the content of the laws alone, but by the ritual forms that made a people feel like a people. The congregational response is one of those forms. Its specific liturgical shape, its position at the close of a declaration, its role as affirmation of the invisible, did not emerge from nowhere. If Spinoza's analysis is correct, and I have spent years looking for the refutation, and have not found one that addresses the structural argument rather than the etymological one, then every time a congregation says, Amen, they are completing a ritual gesture that is 3,000 years older than Christianity, shaped in the shadow of the same theological problem that occupied the priests of Amon-Ra. How do you confirm the presence of a God you cannot see? Jan Assmann is a German Egyptologist who has spent 30 years on the question of how Egyptian religious memory shaped the Western monotheistic tradition. His 1997 book, Moses the Egyptian, does not prove Spinoza right. It does something more interesting. Assmann traces a concept he calls the Mosaic distinction, the categorical separation in monotheistic tradition between the true religion and all other religions, between the God who is real and the gods who are false. This distinction, he argues, does not appear in the ancient world before the Abrahamic monotheisms. Polytheistic cultures could accommodate each other's gods, translate one pantheon into another, acknowledge that the god another people called Ra was the same divine power they called Zeus. This theological hospitality was the default condition of the ancient world. The Mosaic distinction shattered it. Suddenly there is a right religion and a wrong one. The intolerance that Western religious history has spent 3,000 years managing, the wars of religion, the inquisitions, the heresy trials, all of it flows from that single categorical move. Assmann's argument is that this distinction emerged directly from the conflict between Amon and Aten. What Akhenaten did was, historically, the first monotheistic suppression. He declared his God the only real God. He declared the others false. He erased their names. And the restoration that followed had a different quality than a simple return to the status quo, because it had been through the fire of systematic erasure and survived. The Mosaic distinction carries the scar of being the religion whose name was chiseled out of stone. The hidden God, the God whose defining characteristic is that he cannot be fixed in a visible form, cannot be reduced to a physical object that can be erased, is precisely the God whose theology survives because the name is not the God. The God is hidden. The God is elsewhere. The God is affirmed, not depicted. Amen. What Assmann demonstrates, and this is the piece that took me longest to sit with, is that even if the consonants are different, even if the etymology leads to the Hebrew root and not the Egyptian name, the theological architecture is the same. The congregational affirmation of an invisible divine presence operates in both traditions as the primary mechanism by which the hidden God is made present in a specific ritual moment. What you say to confirm your faith to God is what the ancient Egyptians said to invoke the hidden one. The word changed its language, its people, its deity. The function did not change. There is a weight to this kind of knowledge. I want to be honest with you about that, because knowing this changes what you hear when you are in a church, not what you believe necessarily, but what you hear. The word is not simply a Hebrew affirmation of truth. It is a piece of the oldest problem in religious life. How does a community of people confirm the presence of a God they cannot see? That problem is 3,000 years old, at minimum, possibly older. And the sound they settled on, the sound that crosses from Theban temple to Hebrew assembly, to Greek-speaking early Christian community, to every church and mosque and synagogue in the world today, is this: Amen. There is a question no one asks, not, where does the word come from? But why does it still work? I want to end with something the church does not teach, not because the church is hiding it exactly, though the silence is pointed, but because the institutional culture of religious practice does not include etymology in the liturgical program. You say Amen. You do not study it. There is no catechism I have encountered that explains the origin of the word to the congregation. No Sunday sermon that traces the liturgical response back to its documentary antecedents. When Spinoza presented his analysis in the Tractatus in 1670, without his name on the cover, without any identifying information that could be traced, the institutional response was not refutation. It was silence, administrative silence, the kind a powerful institution produces when a question arrives that it cannot answer and refuses to engage. Spinoza's analysis of Moses as a legislator, who understood the psychology of ritual, who knew that a people required familiar forms to internalize a new belief, who adapted ceremonial structures from the Egyptian world he had inhabited for 40 years. That analysis is still in the Tractatus. It was there before the silence arrived. It is there now. What I am not saying is that this diminishes the experience of faith. The word Amen has worked for 3,000 years across languages, continents, and theological systems that share almost nothing else. It has remained the sound with which people confirm the unprovable, the sound with which a community says, we are in this together, and what we are asserting is real even though we cannot demonstrate it. That is not a small thing. The word survived Akhenaten and the erasure of the name from stone. It survived the dispersal of the priests of Amon. It survived translation into every language Christianity touched. It survived because the theological problem it solves is permanent. You cannot see the God. You need to confirm his presence. You need the community to confirm it with you. The next time you say Amen, or hear it said, you will know you are standing at the end of a thread that goes back through 16 centuries of Christian liturgy, back through the early Hebrew communities affirming the 12 curses in Deuteronomy, back to a papyrus from Thebes where a congregation spoke 3,000 years ago to confirm the presence of the hidden God. The word changed its name. The problem it solved did not. Take care of yourselves.